From the stormy sea to the clouds of heaven. Welcome to the second half of Daniel's book, a section that is entirely prophetic, and where the prophet recounts his experience in relation to the visions he receives. The first Christians in the first centuries, and then the Protestants, when they revived prophetic fervor, understood that the four beasts or monsters of Daniel 7 represented the four universal empires that were to happen from Babylon to Rome. In some European cathedrals that joined the Protestant Reformation, these four beasts can be still seen in sculptures or pictures with the inscription of the empires of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Among them is the Strasbourg Cathedral, at the base of the great clock where at 12 o'clock the disciples pass before Christ, who blesses them. You can see the different empires painted with their names. Some sculptures in another cathedral in Nuremberg contains the four beasts of Daniel 7. You may see the pictures in the slide. The lion with wings of an eagle with Nebuchadnezzar, the bear with Cyrus, the leopard with Alexander, and the iron beast with Julius Caesar. Then we see the 10 horns and the Pope represented in the head of the horn. Since God had already revealed to Daniel the great empires that were to occur when he appeared before King Nebuchadnezzar, the prophet is now more intrigued by the details of the fourth kingdom representing Rome, especially the horn that was to come out from Rome and that would persecute the saints of the Most High for 1260 years. The Antichrist, represented by the horn, would dare to try to change God's times and law, Daniel 7:25. So when the Roman Empire of the Caesars fell in Rome, many Christians began to be distressed about the Antichrist that was to come. As time went by and the intolerant character of the popes increased, voices began to appear denouncing the Pope as being that Antichrist that Daniel had predicted, coming after the fall of the Caesars in the capital of Rome. For Protestants in the second Christian millennium, who were tortured, burned alive, and beheaded on the orders of Rome, there was no doubt about the identification of this little horn. It was the Roman papacy that exalted himself above God. The titles that the papacy inherited from the Caesars, plus other arrogant titles like Holy Father and His Holiness, didn't allow any other option. In addition, the Pope required people to kneel before him and confess their sins, assuming a role that belongs only to God. And to top it all off, he changed the fourth commandment of the Decalogue that relates to the time that must be kept for God, the 7-day Sabbath. He transferred the divine rest from Saturday to Sunday. But at what point in time are we to begin the period of 1260 years, which in an apocalyptic prophecy was represented by days? Daniel anticipated that 3 horns or kingdoms opposed to the agenda of the Bishop of Rome would be pulled down before he could begin exercising his political religious authority. Of the 10 European kingdoms that invaded the Roman Empire, 3 were Arians who did not recognize the Bishop of Rome as supreme in political affairs. It was the Vandals, the Visigoths, and the Ostrogoths. Of these, the kingdom that ruled in the same city of Rome where the Roman bishop resided was that of the Ostrogoths. That kingdom was evicted from the capital of the empire in the year 538, the date on which the decree of Justinian, the Roman Eastern emperor, could be put into effect. This decree granted the Pope authority over all Christianity, and recognized it with one of its blasphemous titles, His Holiness. This authority was taken from the papacy in 1798, when General Berthier of Napoleon's army took him prisoner and decreed that no authority would be exerted from the Pope's former kingdom anymore. Some have placed the Heruls, or Heruli, as one of the three kingdoms opposing Rome, but they were not uprooted by Rome. The Heruls were taken by the Ostrogoths, who were likewise Arians, so nothing changed with regard to the pretensions of the Bishop of Rome. Only kingdoms that were defeated by non-Arians and recognized the political religious authority of the Bishop of Rome could serve as a reference to determine the starting point. The Trance of Judgment and the appearance of the Son of Man. This is another important subject of Daniel 7. Daniel also wanted to know more about the final judgment revealed in vision. We find this in Daniel 7, verses 19 to 22. In my book, The Apocalyptic Times of the Sanctuary, I document these historical facts extensively, as well as their biblical and theological implications. Here we will place special emphasis on the last part of the vision that reveals a movement of God's throne in heaven and describes the setting of the thrones of judgment. This event in heaven comes after the political religious authority of the papacy is taken from it, that is, after 1798, when, according to all historians, there begins a new era in the history of mankind. In the service of the sanctuary in ancient Israel, the priest interceded for the people in the holy place during the year, and only at the end of the year, on the Day of Atonement, did the high priest officiate in the most holy place. The latter represented the great day of the final judgment. We will see this more clearly in the study of the next vision that depicts the same event using the language of the sanctuary. The vision in both chapters reveals what happens in heaven at the time of the end. So the sanctuary referred to is that of heaven. And in this context, the movement depicted in the vision is from the holy place to the most holy place. Thrones are established, and the Ancient of Days sits upon his throne. The books of judgment are opened, and the Son of Man appears before the throne. Before the greatest court on earth, that same heavenly being stood as the Son of God to protect the brave young Hebrews from the blazing furnace. Before the greatest court in heaven, he presents himself as the Son of Man to intercede for them when the hour of the final judgment comes. He is a perfect mediator between God and man, because in him divinity is merged with humanity and can accurately understand the two parts of the cosmic conflict that afflicts the universe. Jesus referred to himself as being the Son of Man. But some get confused when they want to locate the time and place of their appearance before God in Daniel 7, represented there as the Ancient of Days. Let us notice first that, unlike we might say, Daniel doesn't say the old man of years, but the Ancient of Days, because for Daniel the term days represented years. In relation to the moment itself referred to in the vision, some place the appearance of the Son of Man at the inauguration of his ministry in heaven, and do the same in the parallel vision of Revelation 5. They don't realize that there are two appearances of Christ before the Father. The inaugural one to be endowed as a high priest, and one at the conclusion of that ministry for a work of judgment. This same confusion is seen with respect to the different purpose of the two appearances of the Son of Man. Many confuse the throne of grace with the throne of glory, the order of Melchizedek with the role of David. They do not know that at the first arrangement, in the 31st year of the Christian era, Jesus was crowned as priest-king according to the order of Melchizedek and sat at the right hand of God on a throne of grace. Hebrews 4 verses 14 to 16. But he was not then invested as king of the New Jerusalem, as David had been over all Jerusalem. After finishing his war of mediation and judgment, Jesus would sit again now on the throne of glory. Said the Lord, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. Matthew 25 verse 31. The spirit of prophecy expressed it in words that cannot be misinterpreted. When Jesus went up to heaven, he was expected to sit and rule upon his throne, to officiate as priest upon his throne, and she quotes Zechariah 6 verse 13. Not now upon the throne of his glory, she said. The kingdom of glory has not yet been ushered in. Not until his work as a mediator shall be ended will God give him the throne of his father David, a kingdom of which there shall be no end. She quotes Luke 1 verses 32 and 33. Because of this ignorance and confusion regarding the two different moments and two different kingdoms that Christ was to assume in the temple in heaven, some cannot perceive the direct relationship of the two visions of the judgment in Daniel 7 and Revelation 5. The final investment of the Son of Man, or Lion of the tribe of Judah, is represented in Revelation 5 by the granting of the book of the law given to the Davidic kings when they assumed the kingdom. Deuteronomy 17 verses 18 and 19, 2 Chronicles 23:11. And since the throne of David his father, which represented the throne in the New Jerusalem, would not be given before concluding the judgment, the ceremony in Daniel 7 and Revelation 5 has to point to that final stage, not to the inaugural one. It is then that our high priest Jesus says to those who follow him on earth at the time of the end, I am going to my Father to receive the kingdom. Where? In the Holy of Holies, early writings, page 55. The spirit of prophecy says, the time will come when all will praise him, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof. Where is that final ceremony held? Again, in the most holy place, where Moses put the book of the kingdom beside the ark of the covenant. See Deuteronomy 31 verses 24 to 26. This is the reason why John places the vision of the throne within an open door, with Ellen G. White correctly linked to the door of the most holy place. She wrote, There is one who sees it all, and he says, I have set before thee an open door. Through this door was shown the throne of God, overshadowed by the rainbow of promise. Here an open as well as a shut door is brought to view, she wrote. Christ changed his ministration from the holy to the most holy place. Now let us look more specifically at the place of appearance in Daniel 7 and Revelation 5. Some Seventh-day Adventists are confused because they know that the earthly priests officiated throughout the year in the holy place, with the door closed to the most holy place, until the day of judgment at the end of the year, on the Day of Atonement. It was then that the door was opened to the most holy place, Leviticus 16. And since the throne of God was in the most holy place where the ark was, how is it possible, they reasoned, that the Son had been separated from the Father for more than 1800 years, from the year 31st to 1844, when the door was expected to be opened to the most holy place according to Daniel 8:14 and Revelation 11:19. In addition, the apostles were clear in affirming that Jesus sat at the right hand of God, and referred to him later as remaining seated there with his Father on his throne. Therefore, those confused brothers reject the spatial structural correspondence of the earthly temple with the heavenly one. But neither our pioneers nor Ellen G. White ever believed in this presumable separation of nearly 2 millennia between the Father and the Son, and yet they affirm the spatial and functional correspondence of the earthly and heavenly sanctuary. Why? Because they recognized that there would be not only structural and functional correspondences between the two shrines, but also contrasts that God anticipated in prophecy. What would be the contrast? The Apostle Paul detailed them in the Epistle to the Hebrews. Contrast foretelling prophecy. First, the nature of the sacrifice would be different, not of animals, but of the Messiah. And he quotes Psalm 40. We find this in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 4 to 10. Second point, the genealogical ancestry of the priesthood would not be the same. It would not come from Aaron, but from David. Psalm 110, verse 4, and Hebrews 7. Third contrast, the office of the new priesthood would be more encompassing, for Jesus would be at the same time king according to the order of Melchizedek, who was not only a priest but only king. And the apostle confirmed this, quoting the Old Testament, a prophecy of the Old Testament, Psalm 110, and he quotes it in Hebrews chapter 5 and in chapter 7. Fourth contrast, as a priest and at the same time king, Christ would minister seated at the right hand of God, Hebrews 8:1. Another contrast, since the early priests did not officiate seated. In addition to Psalm 110, quoted by the Apostle Paul to justify this change, Ellen G. White quoted Zechariah 6, where we are told that the Messiah would be a priest upon his throne. Where? In the holy place, seated at the right hand of God. Let us read the precise statements of the spirit of prophecy. What was done in type in the ministration of the earthly is done in reality in the ministration of the heavenly. After his ascension, our Savior began his work as our high priest. In harmony with the typical service, he began his ministration in the holy place. And in 1844, according to the vision of Daniel 7 and 8, the Father and the Son moved to the most holy place for a final work of judgment, where the Son would receive the kingdom of David. As foreshadowed in the time, wrote Ellen G. White, and foretold in the Scriptures, Christ, at the time appointed, entered the most holy of the temple of God in heaven. He is represented by the prophet Daniel as coming at this time to the Ancient of Days. Indeed, there is no prophecy pointing out a change in the structure of the heavenly temple. And Daniel 7's vision shows us that in the time of the end, there is a movement of the Father that now sits on his throne in the most holy place, where thrones are established that second his work of judgment. It is then that the Son goes from the holy place where he had been sitting at the right hand of his Father to the most holy place to officiate standing in the midst of the final court of judgment. At the conclusion of the judgment, the Lamb sits on the throne of his glory and is proclaimed King of kings and Lord of lords. I develop and document all of this extensively in my second and third seminars of the sanctuary, the apocalyptic expectations of the sanctuary and the glorious fulfillments of the sanctuary, with precise quotations from the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. In the vision of the court of heaven, Daniel sees books being opened. The emphasis of the vision of Revelation 5 is on the book of the kingdom that will empower the second David to be king of those he rescued with his blood. In the rest of the book of Revelation, the 4 living beings and the 24 elders always appear in the context of the final judgment and the appearance of the redeemed before the throne of God. It makes no sense to restrict this vision to Christ's ascension after his resurrection. The fact that the books of judgment are open proves that, in addition to enforcing the Son of Man with power and dominion, something also emphasized by Revelation 5, the purpose of the judgment is to investigate the testimony of God's people. Because Daniel is also told that judgment is given in behalf of the saints of the Most High, Daniel 7:22, after which they receive the kingdom together with the Son of Man. How wonderful it is to know that we will soon appear before that court of heaven after being vindicated in judgment. What a spectacle it will be to stand before the throne of God with the great multitude of redeemed, before the 4 cherubs surrounding the throne of God, the 24 elders, and the millions and millions of angels who will acclaim God's work of redemption. Let us prepare for that glorious event, because the Lamb's wedding is ready. And soon we will be granted the privilege of sitting at the table to participate in the wedding supper.